門葛藤集第80則Rinzai広報Rinzai浄土に曰く一人は広報中将にあって終身の道なく一人は十字街頭にあってまた後悔なし長か前にあり長か知り合いにある結巻長となさされ風来師となさされ珍重と Entangling Vines, Case 80 Rinzai's solitary peak. Rinzai took the high seat in the hall and said, "One person is atop a solitary peak with nowhere further to go. One person is at a busy crossroads, distinguishing neither front nor back. Which one is ahead? Which one is behind? Don't take one to be Vimalakirti and the other to be Fudaishi. Take good care of yourselves." Good evening. Our long day is heading towards the dark hours again. We started in the dark. We end up in the dark. And between those two darknesses, it's up to us to choose if it is the darkness of not knowing or the darkness of ignorance. And then you will listen to talks that tell you ignorance and not knowing are not different from each other. Awakening and ignorance are not different from each other. I thought I just had figured it out. Now I'm being told it is different. One really important hint to this is learn to look at the functioning of what is happening, of what is manifest, and don't get convoluted in and dragged into the content. It's a very important thing to consider. As long as we think that we can solve anything with content, that there is a thing that we have to acquire that will help us to ultimately function better, it's not going to work. So functioning, activity, dynamism. That's why it was so wonderful to hear about Hakuin yesterday, who was so dynamic, and who found new ways of expressing this dynamic teaching outside of what had been the traditional way of doing it. And of course, this kind of way of this tradition is truly that what's traditional here is that there is no method. That's the method, which is the no method. And as this tradition invents itself in the same way that the truth eternally reveals itself, we have to realize that is true for ourselves as well. If you have a playbook for your life, for the Sesshin, by now you probably figured out that something's not working. The only book that would be accepted here would be one that has lots of blank pages. And maybe you tried something else before this practice. The place that had the blank page hung up and it said on it, "This page is blank." I think that's pretty funny. But this page is blank, yeah. By now, the tiredness, even though it's just one day, has turned from an annoyance, from something that we'd like to avoid, into a good friend. A Greek friend, Morpheus. Come on, take the thinking in your arms. Let the self-concern go to sleep so that we can what? Awaken. One thing goes to sleep, something arises and awakens. This is a wonderful koan here that is an excerpt from the discourses of Master Rinzai. Now, since you have come to a Rinzai place, I will not have to say much about Master Rinzai. And if you don't know much about him, investigate. You will find out, of course, there is some shouting involved. There is some hitting involved, yeah. And that style of Zen, yeah, is called Bo-katsu Zen. Bo is the stick, and katsu is the shout. But here, that seems rather tame, what we have here, this koan. No shouting, no hitting. Rinzai takes the high seat in the hall and says, "One person is atop a solitary peak with nowhere further to go. One person is at a busy crossroads, distinguishing neither front nor back. Which one is ahead? Which one is behind? Don't take one to be Vimalakirti and the other to be Fudaishi. Take good care of yourselves." This is how it is translated by Yuho-san, Thomas Kirshner, who translated the Shumon Kattoshu into English. In this case, I would like to present you with a number of alternate translations so you can hear the various ways how translators, it's not so much translate. There is a decent amount of interpretation, intuition, guessing, feeling that has then to do with what oneself has experienced, how the English comes out. In the Chinese and the characters, I don't know how difficult it is to understand, but those who read Chinese probably can get the sense of it. But that's what it is. It's the sense of it. It's the gist of it. It's not precise at all. So here's an alternate translation. This is from Miura Sasaki book. One person is on top of a solitary peak and has no path by which to leave. One person is at the busy crossroads and has neither front nor back. Which is ahead? Which is behind? Burton Watson, different translator, in his 1993 edition, translates it as follows. One person is sitting on top of a lonely mountain peak. Yet they have not removed themselves from the world. One person is in the middle of the city streets. Yet they have no likes or dislikes. Now, which one is ahead? Which one is behind? Thomas Cleary. One person is up on the summit of a solitary peak with no way to come forth. One person is at the crossroads and neither faces nor turns away from the passing scene. Which is in front? Which is behind? And lastly, Shimano Edo Roshi. Ascending the high seat, the master said, one is on a solitary peak and is unable to tread the path. Another one is at a busy crossroads, yet is free from preferences. Which one is ahead? Which one is behind? Don't regard them as Vimalakirti or Mahasattvafu. Take care. So this last portion is common. I didn't read it for each one, but don't regard one as Vimalakirti and the other one as Fudaishi is in all of them. We can also see that what is in common is, well, there is a solitary peak and there's somebody on that peak. There are crossroads and there is someone at crossroads. There's a question of front and back. Some translate it as, now which one of the two is ahead or behind? One translation said, neither faces nor turns away. Two translations point to preferences. So you can see the gamut is pretty wide here, pretty wide. But by reading multiple translations, we can get what the original Chinese reader gets by looking at the characters, the gist of it. So that last line about Vimalakirti and Fudaishi can also be rendered in a different way. It can be translated as, don't do like Vimalakirti, don't do like Fudaishi. No, maybe we should find out what they did. Who are these people? You have probably heard the names before. I think Vimalakirti was invoked yesterday, just yesterday in Shingeroshi's Teisho. And I somehow remember the word, did you say raunchy? There's a sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra, and especially chapter 2 has the goods. You want to read some raunchy Buddhist text? Go and read that. But it's not raunchy for the sake of being raunchy. It is a text that points and brings Vimalakirti in all different situations that a human being could or would face. So these two guys, Vimalakirti and Fudaishi, what do they have in common? Does anyone know what they have in common?
Are they lay people?
That's right. They're lay people. It's interesting hearing the word lay people. It already sounds like a put down, doesn't it? But we should never think of it that way. This monastery is a monastery that is here to train anyone who comes with the desire to engage in this kind of activity and training. There is no requirement to be ordained. The only requirement is one has to bring that very, very deep commitment and that longing that brings so many of us here. The longing for what we yet feel we are lacking. That is all. So, lay people, regular human beings, just as who? Siddhartha, regular human being. Oh, well. He suffered from one disease when he was born, and that was affluenza. But he got cured from that pretty quickly. He removed himself from the source of the illness. These people, however, they're quite different. So Vimalakirti, we learn about him in the Vimalakirti Sutra and through third person reports about him. So there's really not much to say. He lived about the same time as the historical Buddha, it is said. But there's very little known except what he did. And we'll get to that. Let's talk about the other person, Fudaishi, because we know much more about Fudaishi. And it is actually quite interesting to learn about Fudaishi. So Fudaishi, we know when he lived, from 497 in the Common Era to 569. And he only appears in this one case here in the Shuman Kattoshu. It's a title, Fudaishi. His name, I think, was Fu Shi, a Buddhist layman who lived in China. He married at the age of, already see the difference, usually people get ordained at that age. Well, it's not so different. It's a commitment to a practice. The practice of becoming ordained as a shami, as a follower of the Buddhist path, is the commitment to engage in the relationship with giving oneself fully to the Dharma. The commitment of marriage is the commitment to give oneself fully away to the relationship with another human being. Both are wonderful practice. Wonderful practice. So he got married at the age of 16, and he had twin sons. His occupation, he was a fisherman, catching fish every day with a net, selling them in the market, going about his business, supporting his family with the proceeds. And it's very benign. We provide food to somebody. But then, in his early 20s, he was exposed to the teachings when he heard a mendicant foreign monk, who some people say was Bodhidharma, because they lived about the same time, preaching the Buddhist teachings. And there, for the first time, he heard about ahimsa. Do not harm. Do not take life. And his nature was to be deeply struck by that. All these fish. Yes, people need to eat. But I can choose to let somebody else catch the fish. And for me and my family, we will not harm any beings by consuming them any longer. So, he decided to give up his fish catching, and he became a farmer. He became a farmer, and living with his family in a small hut under 2 sala trees, he cultivated his fields during the day, and he followed what the monk he heard had told him about cultivating his mind through meditation, meditative practices. During the day, cultivating the field that is physical. At night, after serving his family, cultivating the field that is non-physical, but of equal, the word comes to mind, fecundity, of equal promise for rich harvest. He described his lifestyle in a gatha in a poem that he created. With empty hands, I hold a hoe. While walking, I ride a water buffalo. I walk over a bridge. The bridge flows. The water does not. It is clear here when we see the 2 sides of Fudaishi. Yes, of course, with empty hands he holds a hoe. Both when he throws himself wholeheartedly with his whole being in tilling the field that is physical, but also empty hands when tilling through that dust and the layers of materials that have accumulated in our lifetimes and obscure what lies underneath. Walking and riding a water buffalo. Yeah. No difference between walking in the field and riding the oxen. Yesterday we heard about the 10th ox herding picture. And we will hear about today again. Walking over the bridge flows, the water does not. What an interesting point of shift of stillness and motion. Rehear the lines that we together read in Shinjin Mei, believing in mind about motion and stillness. Fu took the name Good Wisdom Bodhisattva, Zento Daishi, and devoted his life to practice, teaching, and works of charity, of compassion. So during the era that was called Datong, 527 to 529, the area in which Fudaishi and his family lived was stricken by famine. Agriculture is not like it is nowadays. The dependency on weather, the dependency on having the right seeds. There were no genetically modified seeds that grow the way they grow nowadays. There were no methods but natural to help against pests. A locust might come even in the best year and eat early in the season what would have become fruit. So famines were not something that was unheard of. It happened quite often, as we can find out here in Fudaishi's life. So in order to obtain money for food for his own family, he sold off his fields. He sold off his fields that at that point weren't worth much. They didn't bring any crops. And he even convinced his wife and his twin sons to sell themselves into slavery. They were released several months later, fortunately. But that whole family was selfless. In 534, he composed a letter and sent it to the emperor that we know from case 1 of the Hekigan Roku. Remember, this is a contemporary of Bodhidharma. When Bodhidharma came and was tired walking with one shoe, he visited the Emperor Wu. This is the same emperor, the Emperor Wu of Liang, who reigned from 502 until 549. And so he went to Nanking for an audience, and there he lectured on the sutras, leaving quite an impression on the emperor. He was 24 years when he met that mendicant monk who changed his life from fisherman into somebody who paid attention to cultivation of crops, of mind, of heart, and of people. His family were part of that, as this cultivation. Yeah. So this ascetic, actually, we have a source that tells us what he said to Fudaishi. He said, "You and I, we took the same vow at Vipassin Buddha's place." Vipassin Buddha? Bibashi Butsu. And your robe and your bowl still remain in the palace of Tushita heaven. When will you return there? The ascetic asked Fudaishi. The ascetic pointed to a mountain peak that was right there and urged him to go there and meditate. One day, Fudaishi had a vision of 3 Buddhas appearing. Shakyamuni Buddha, Vimalakirti, who is also sometimes called the golden grain Tathagata, and another Buddha we already met, Dipankara Buddha. And all of them, they were sending out rays of light and shining them right onto him, onto his body. And what he realized is, next connection, Surangama Samadhi. We also chanted the magic formula of Surangama on Daibosatsu Day. And we will have a chance to chant it again for Jodo-e. And in this Samadhi, all things are perceived in their ultimate I can't even say that word. Imperturbability. Unable to be messed with in any way. And that when he realized that he had received these teachings of what's called the 9th stage of a bodhisattva. So, which of the stories is true? If he really just sat at night in his hut, and maybe there he ascended that solitary mountain peak that Rinzai is talking about, without ever having to go to that mountain that the ascetic maybe never pointed to. But there is nothing between the two stories that cannot be taken into the gist of it. So now, when he sent that letter to Emperor Wu and was invited to talk about the sutra, well, guess which sutra he was talking about? Of course, the Diamond Sutra. So he presented himself at the palace to help the emperor awaken and see into this Bodhidharma had tried that before. Was he successful? Not so much. Not so much. But here, Fudaiji will try anyway. And it's true nowadays as it had been true since the beginning of times and human society. People do attach great importance to the outward appearance of human beings, as well as to people's upbringing, to people's professional and academic achievements, titles, social standing. It has changed a little bit nowadays. Nowadays you can be uneducated as long as you have a shitload of money. You're a great guy, or a great gal, or a great person. Yeah, not more needs to be said about that, really. So, but all of this has no standing in the view of someone who investigates the Buddha Dharma. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. So, Fu came to the palace. He wore a hat. He wore a monk's robe. And he wore a pair of shoes. Now that doesn't sound very strange. But for the time, it was revolutionary because it really was against all conventions, all aspects and all the characteristics that a monk has. There's one thing that monks are not allowed to do in that time. No hat. no hat, and he wore the monk's robe. A Taoist is not allowed to wear shoes. And remember what he was? He was a layman. He wore a monk's robe. Transgression after transgression, from the point of view of fixated ideas, but from the point of view of dynamic manifestation, brilliant. Brilliant. So, there he is, with his hat, his monk's robe, and shoes. He did it, he wanted to wipe out all conceptions that the emperor had by just stunning him already with his appearance, you know? So, he was supposed to speak about the Diamond Sutra. He came in his outfit. He walked up to the platform, sat down, and descended. Well, the emperor was dumbfounded. First of all, he couldn't believe what he's seeing. And then he didn't say anything. He went there, he hit the lectern and left. That sounds like a repeat, you know? Bodhidharma also left. And the funny thing is, the emperor had his Buddhist teacher by the name of Shiko. And Shiko was asked when Bodhidharma was there, Shiko said to the emperor, well, Your Majesty, do you know who this was? You know? And then comes the whole thing, well, it was an incarnation of the Bodhisattva Kanzeon. And the emperor, oh my God, we should run after him. Shiko at that says, well, sorry, it's too late. In this case, Shiko turned to the emperor and said, Your Majesty, have you understood? And the emperor said his favorite thing here. No. No, I don't get it. I don't get it. And Shiko said, well, the great master has concluded his lecture. So this is what Fudaishi did in 534. I am sure we can say he left an impression. If it really impressed the emperor, I don't know. 539, he returned to his old home and established a temple. Again, he sold his property, went without food, and some of the food shortages were due to the bad government. He vowed to immolate, so burn himself up, put himself on fire in order to protest against and end the suffering of the commoners, of the people, during these political disorders that came at the end of the reign of Emperor Wu. His followers, his disciples, and his family were able to dissuade him from putting himself to become a human torch. But several years later, during another famine, the same thing. He went back to labor in the fields. He went into the woods to find wild foods to feed the hungry. This is real dedication. All the time when he did that, he continued his own ascetic practices and practiced with his Sangha. There's one also interesting thing of his ingenuity. He invented a part that you find in Chinese Zen monasteries, which is a piece of furniture where it's mounted on an axle so that it can revolve. And it's like a revolving bookshelf, kind of, but it is used as a revolving sutra library. So it helps to take up less room. You put the sutras in, and then you can just turn it around and find the sutra without having to take up a whole wall. So he invented that. And then here comes the wonderful ingenuity. How can I help the commoners who I fed not only food, but I also, said Fudaishi, I want to help them understand and gain the teachings and the merit of these sutras, but they can't read them. So what did he teach them? Come up to the library. Turn it around its axle and be open and receive through that movement the teachings from the sutras just by turning, not unlike a Tibetan prayer mill where the Dharma revolves and then extends itself. Yeah. Quite interesting. Fudaishi said, when you realize original mind, the mind sees Buddha. The mind is Buddha. This Buddha is mind. Every thought is Buddha mind. Buddha mind dwells on Buddha. If you wish to accomplish this soon, be alert and disciplined. Pure precepts purify the mind. The mind then is Buddha. Apart from this mind king, there is no other Buddha. Innen was mentioned. Innen, karmic connections. Karmic connections, serendipities in the Dharma. I learned something, and it kind of struck me that it's serendipitous. How does the dedication, Ino-san, start for Daibosatsu Day? Anyone remember? Did you listen? With your hearts, I'm sure. No, there is a reality prior to heaven and earth. So Fudaishi wrote another gatha, another poem. It goes like this. There is something prior to heaven and earth, without form, without sound, without a name. It has the power to control all the things of change, yet itself, it changes not in the course of the 4 seasons. Wonderful. Wonderful. So, this is Fudaishi. Fudaishi, of course, this going up there is worth a koan. Isn't it? Hekigan Roku, Blue Cliff Record, Case 67. Fu Daishi concludes his lecture on the sutra. Emperor Wu of Liang asked Fu Daishi to give a lecture on the Diamond Sutra. Fu Daishi mounted the platform, struck the reading desk with his stick, and descended from the platform. The emperor was dumbfounded. Shiko said to him, "Your Majesty, have you understood?" The emperor said, "No." Shiko said, "Daishi has concluded his lecture." There it is. Now Vimalakirti, in the sutra, there is something that also made it into koans. And that is the place where Vimalakirti visits Manjushri. And when he visits Manjushri, all the bodhisattvas are assembled. And Vimalakirti suggests that the assembled bodhisattvas should express and tell their own expression of this full awareness of reality, of non-duality. It describes then how these 31 bodhisattvas answered. These multiple facets from all sides, dualities such as good and evil, saintly and profane, dark and light, birth and death. In this relative reality we exist in, all too often we take them just as conventional truth. I've spoken often about non-duality because if we live in that duality, there's a very limited way of interaction. Well, there's relationship, which is wonderful, but to take that as the only existing way to be is rather limiting. So all the bodhisattvas gave a brief but thorough account of some apparent dichotomy, let's call it, or some polarity, and how they transcended to enter non-dual awareness. One describes how he transcended grief and happiness, for example. Another one, how they became into a state of equanimity concerning purity and impurity. And so it goes on, 31 of them. It must have been pretty boring. Finally, Manjushri congratulates all of them for their fine explanations and says, "But all your statements themselves were firmly rooted in duality." Manjushri then turns to Vimalakirti and asks him to expound on his way to enter non-duality. And Vimalakirti remains silent. This is known in our school as the thunderous silence of Vimalakirti. Manjushri applauded him, proclaiming that Vimalakirti has indeed not explained, but demonstrated the entrance into non-duality, beyond all sounds, beyond all words and conceptions. All the 31 explanations that were heard before were at best dualistic commentaries on what Vimalakirti manifested. So now we are equipped to look at Rinzai's saying. And I used the translation that was hung up. One person is atop a solitary peak with nowhere further to go. Oh, Fudaishi, yeah, well, peak. The monk told him to go on the peak. But he meditated too. Solitary peak. What is that? What is that? Blue Cliff Record, case 26. A monk asks Hyakujo what basically his favorite thing is. What is the pinnacle of your life? And Hyakujo answers, Dokuza Dai Yuho. Sitting alone on the sublime peak. When we sit in the Zendo here, and our self-referential mind goes into Morpheus' arms, yeah. And there is no past mind, no present mind, no future mind, no Buddha, no Dharma, no Sangha, just this. The sublime solitary peak is manifest. There's no more place further to go, because that is no place and all places. No time and all times. It is again like the flagpole that has appeared so often already in various talks. On top of the flagpole. Apparently, there is no path forward there too. But we are asked to step forward. I had this terrible visual of the person on the flagpole just remaining seated there. They're sitting there, and that thing is pretty pointed. And so I had this horrific idea of an awakened, like a Buddhist kebab or skewer, where the person, well, they want to leave, but they hold on to it, and so the only thing is they have to impale themselves. And they come down to the bottom of the flagpole. Well, they still have the achievement, but damn, they can't go anywhere because they're attached to it, you know? And it's fairly painful. Nowhere to go when they hold on to the peak, when they hold on to the flagpole. It still hurts me to think about it. And I think you will not forget it. So, same thing. The other person is at a busy crossroads, distinguishing neither front nor back. Marketplace, number 10. Number 10. Returning. What is it called? Entering the marketplace with suishu. Suishu. Suishu inin dosho. That's returning to the marketplace with really it means relaxed or dangling hands. It's translated sometimes. Entering the marketplace with extended hands for the salvation of all beings. Suishu is a part of our formal practice, or it is the other side of it. We know the two hand positions we use in formal practice. Gassho and shashu. Palms to palms and forked hands. It really means forked hands. And so in Zen terminology and Zen training, suishu, where we can leave your hands wherever you want, means it's informal, outside of the formal times, without formality, neither gassho nor shashu. Informal, and here in the ox herding picture, it's used to depict this naturally arising compassion of a person who has awakened. So, those busy crossroads, somebody's phone is ringing. Somebody has their alarm set to this time, 12 hours earlier. You maybe know by now. Please turn it off. But this is the sign for us also to awaken. So now here we have this dichotomy, the person sitting up on the peak and the person in the crossroads, distinguishing neither front nor back. Which one is ahead, which one is behind? Now, no good koan goes by without putting out the bait. The bait for us to swallow. Hook, line, and sinker. My ordination teacher, Joshu Roshi, was a very good fisherman. He had excellent bait. And he would put it out for you in Doksan. And then when you took it, he would yank and pull you out of the water. And then what do we do? The same thing that fish do. Boop. You know, flop around, not knowing what to do. And he would laugh and laugh and laugh with you. And one of his statements always was, "Oh, Doksan, so much more entertaining than TV." So which one is ahead, which one is behind? Don't take one to be Vimalakirti and the other to be Fudaishi. The dichotomy between on the solitary peak and in the crossroads came to me, interestingly, in a visual way. When you imagine a peak, everything, all the arrows, go here to that place. And since all the arrows go here, you can't get away from there. You sit in the crossroads, all the crossroads lead away from you. No back, no front, just out. Master Rinzai often speaks about holding fast and letting go. We can see this expression here manifested in a physical way of coming all together, gathering the heart-mind, Sesshin, ending up at the solitary peak. Formality Gasho, Shashu. Descending, finding suddenly, oh, we're sitting here in the middle of everything. Giving everything away, without back, without front, without up, without down. Not following even Vimalakirti, not even following the example of Fudaishi, not even following the example of Rinzai, but making an example of our own life. That takes a lot of courage. And it is a privilege to spend this long day with these, however many we are, bodhisattvas, raising that courage every time we put our buttocks on the cushion, mounting that solitary peak. And when the bell rings, without any path that would have led us to the crossroads, rising up and going forth into this world. It says it right there. One